Everybody, welcome. So glad to have you all at today's webinar. I'm Elliot Levine, Research Director at the Aurora Institute, and today is this webinar is part of our ongoing series of webinars that are advancing the transformation of K-12 education to ensure high-quality education for all learners. And today we're very excited to have presenters from the Vermont Agency of Education who are experts in personalized proficiency-based learning. They'll also be introducing themselves, but I want to take a minute to welcome Pat Fitzsimmons, Ryan Parkman, Emily Loita, and Sigrid Olson. And we really appreciate you all joining us today. Thanks so much. Before they get started, I do want to note that Vermont has been a national leader in this work for years, and I really encourage you to visit their website and take a look at the great materials they've developed around framing and implementing proficiency-based education, or terms we'll use interchangeably, competency-based, mastery-based, proficiency-based education. Pat Fitzsimmons will also be showing you the really terrific report that she wrote and published recently through the Aurora Institute based on the work that she and her team will be discussing today. That report is available on the Aurora website, and I know Pat's team will be sharing the link for that during the webinar. And can I have the next slide, please? During today's webinar, we encourage you to use the chat, and you could start by introducing yourself if you haven't already, and please feel free to use it anytime to ask questions, add comments, share resources. If we don't have time to get to all of your questions during the webinar, the Vermont team has very generously offered to stay after and answer any remaining questions. We also welcome you to share your thoughts about the webinar on Twitter. And finally, just wanted to mention that today's session is being recorded, and we will email you in the next couple days with a link to the recording and the slide deck, which will be archived permanently on our website. And now I'd like to turn it over to our presenters. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and Pat will get us started.
Well, thank you, Elliot, for that kind introduction. We're very happy to be here today and so glad that all of you are interested in the work that we've been doing. First of all, we want to thank you for making time in your busy days. We know there's a lot going on right now, so thank you so much for finding an hour within your day to spend with us. We're going to start out by finding a little bit about you. We want you to tell us what is the most interesting way that you've ever shown that you know something. You can go to menti.com, and Ryan is going to drop the link in the chat box. And then you will need to type in code 5214097. He'll put that in the chat box also. We'll give you a minute or so to get the most interesting way you've ever shown you know something. So I'll be quiet for just a little while to let you think about that and get your responses in there. We won't be looking at them right now, but we will be returning to them later in this presentation. And actually, thinking about time, I'm going to move ahead, but you can keep working on that. You might miss this picture of these amazing 5 people who are your presenters today. This was the team that worked on the convenings, that created the convenings and facilitated them. Unfortunately, Maggie could not be here with us today. We know she's here with us in spirit and wishing us well. I want to also thank some members of our team. Although they didn't facilitate the sessions, they were really important in terms of creating them. They gave us important feedback that helped us to improve each session. So that would be Kyle Anderson, Martha Dice, and Susan Yasalonia, and also our division director, Jessica Carolus, who who supported us and provides great leadership in terms of moving to student-centered learning environments. So this is the report that Elliot mentioned earlier. It tells the story of the convenings that we held last year. We are going to be going through things fairly quickly today. We only have you for an hour. So we encourage you to go into this report to learn more about some of the tools and resources that we used with educators and some of the lessons that we learned through those experiences. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sigrid. Vermont is a very special place, and we just want to share some interesting facts about Vermont with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sigrid, and I am not a native Vermonter. I am actually a native Floridian. And so I've lived in Vermont for 18 and a half years, and I've lived in a lot of other states around the country. And when we were we knew that we'd be presenting both. I see we have some of our Vermont friends with us today, but we knew that we would also be reaching out to a lot of you who are from different places around the country. We will be talking about the Vermont education and policy, a little bit about what that looks like in Vermont. But I really wanted to sort of back up and just say, throw out a few things out there that can explain why we think we're pretty special here in Vermont. So here are some of the interesting facts about Vermont that actually really do influence the way that we work. I'm a former social studies teacher, so I believe that place influences how you think and how you interact with people. So you can read through that yourself, and some of those are kind of interesting facts about Vermont and how small we are, and about how our state, the geography of our state, and how we really, people say Vermont is a big town or something like that. I do want you to take note of the first bullet, which is the number of students that we have in our entire state is probably smaller than some of your districts, and that is an interesting fact as well about Vermont.
Okay, hi folks.
Before we move on, I just want to mention our beer, cheese, and ice cream are really amazing.
They're pretty good.
I kind of like the fact that our tallest building is still under 125 feet. But okay, hi folks, Ryan Parkman here. I'm the math specialist.
And we have no billboards. Yeah.
No billboards on the proficiency-based learning team. And I wanted to take a little time to put a little more perspective on the Vermont educational landscape. In particular, the ways in which our government really supports our state agency, and also the way in which the state supports proficiency-based learning. A little while ago, in fact, 2013 now, we passed Act 77, which has been known as the Flexible Pathways Initiative. And that really paved the way for schools to allow for students to demonstrate their learning outside of the classroom. Those pathways can be academic or experiential. And there are ways in which students can demonstrate they're meeting their school's graduation proficiencies, and which will ultimately lead to their diploma, and also ensuring that they are college and career ready. Here in the state, we have our Vermont State Board of Education, which puts out our education quality standards. And those are the standards that describe what a high quality education should look like for any and every student who attends a public school in Vermont. Act 1 is a more recent legislation, and that is focused on ethnic and social equity. And that's there's actually been a task force that's been assigned so far to make recommendations for standards for the state board to adopt. And those are going to be trying to recognize fully the history, contributions, and perspectives of both ethnic and social groups. The last bullet there is Act 173, and that's a really big one. That legislation has been a real driving force behind much of what we do here in Vermont. Yep, there we go. So Act 173, that was passed to enhance the effectiveness, availability, and equity of services provided to all students who require additional supports in Vermont schools. And part of that is that strong local comprehensive assessment systems are one of the main areas to making that vision a reality. Just to let you know, the other areas that are identified as one of the 4 focus areas in that legislation are educational support teams, curriculum coordination, and needs-based professional development. On this slide, we have the Vermont definition of proficiency-based learning. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but what I'd like you to do right now is to take a minute, read over that definition, and then as you're reading or after, what are some words, phrases, or thoughts that come to mind? And if you could, pop those right in the chat. We'd kind of like to see what your thoughts are as you read over the Vermont proficiency-based learning definition.
Flexibility, empowerment, demonstrates knowledge, skills, and abilities, that the importance of actually doing something, being able to apply knowledge. It's really important for kids to own learning. The idea of agency is really important in our thinking in Vermont, as well as other parts of the country.
It's great. My eyes are just drawn over to the chat. I'm reading what everyone's writing. It's great stuff. Okay. Now, just give a little history on where we came up with this definition. We relied heavily on the Aurora Institute's new definition of competency-based education. When that came out, we were all excited, and we went back and wanted to kind of put it into a Vermont context. And we looked at those components, the 7 components that Aurora has for their definition, and we thought we'd make parallel statements that really kind of were Vermont centered. And some of those, I'll just highlight our 7 components, and those were that students make important decisions about learning experiences. Assessments are both meaningful and yield actionable feedback. That students receive varied instruction and differentiated support. We saw this in the chat, that progress is based on evidence of proficiency. That students learn using different pathways with varied pacing. This is a big one, that strategies to ensure equity are embedded throughout all educational systems. And then that learning targets are rigorous, common, and reflect deeper learning. And if you'd like to see the full characteristics that we have, you can visit our website, and it's in a document called What is Proficiency-Based Learning?
I think one of the important things that Aurora Institute modeled for us, and that we did also, the idea of revisiting things over time, because as we learn more, we want to adjust so that we have a more accurate definition and description of what we're talking about. So we have the legislation in place. We have the rules that support proficiency-based learning. However, we had a fairly vague description of what college and career readiness is. And since that's in our education quality standards, we weren't allowed to change that. However, we did not have a portrait of a graduate at that point in time. And so Sigrid and I met with over 300 people, educators, community members, parents, business people, but most importantly, students, to create a Vermont portrait of a graduate. It was really fun to see how it evolved over time and improved. This is a really bad PowerPoint slide, I know that, but we put it in here so that when you go to our website, you'll know what to look for to find out more about the portrait. Here you can see the attributes, the 6 attributes, along with the descriptors. And I've blown out those attributes in this slide so that you could see them a little bit better. My favorite part of this work was working with students. It was the students who demanded that we included well-being. You know, what foresight? Not only is well-being always important, but right now, even more important. However, it's not the only attribute. There are 5 other attributes that are also important. So the portrait really creates a clear destination. Where do we want to go? It's important for everybody to have that clarity in mind, while the personalized learning plans, which Sigrid will talk more about and share an example later, really provide that roadmap that allows students to meet those expectations. We found that as we worked with educators, there was some confusion about what we meant by portrait of a graduate, that people were equating the portrait of a graduate with graduation requirements. So we created this slide to help people understand the relationships of the different components and how personalized learning plans are woven throughout all of the pieces. So the goal is really to connect the threads in meaningful ways so that we enable students to meet the expectations within the portrait. Another thing, this is Vermont. We love our local control. I call it a Vermont portrait of a graduate, not the Vermont portrait of a graduate, because local context really matters. It's important for people to have those conversations about what they value, what they think is really important for their students. So I just wanted to, clarify that. Right, so we know where we want to go. How are we going to ensure that students are moving in that direction? We created this graphic of a local comprehensive assessment system. This is really the big picture, that we think performance assessments are essential within a strong local comprehensive assessment system, because the person who is doing the work is also doing the learning. So you'll see that multiple formative assessment formative performance assessments that allow kids to really think about their learning, apply it in different situations. For teachers to check in with those minute-to-minute formative assessments, are they moving in the right direction? Having multiple opportunities to look and learn a concept from a variety of perspectives. And then it's important for teachers to check in, that interim or benchmark assessment. Are they really where I think they should be at this point in time? Providing additional opportunities for learning that all build to a summative or comprehensive performance assessment. So that's a really important part, but it's not enough. So in this slide, you'll see that top part relates to the slide we just looked at. The second row is what when we did our convenings and asked people to draw graphics of their local comprehensive assessment systems, we saw that second row was more likely to be represented in those graphics. Important, but not enough. So the screeners for all students provide important information. Diagnostics and monitoring tools are certainly important to keep track and to enable kids to meet expectations. However, thinking about the whole system, the different parts, and providing those opportunities for students to engage in performance assessments that allow them not only to develop a deep understanding of content, but also we're concerned about transferable skills or 21st century skills. So effective communication, practical problem solving, self-direction, that we need to provide, that performance assessments provide those opportunities to ensure students are developing those skills also, and for us to check in as to where they are in the development process. So once again, we'd like to clarify our thinking. It's been really helpful for us to work on a glossary and talk about terms that are really important to us. So we want to clarify what we meant by performance assessment. So what I'm going to have you do with this slide, I want you to read it over, and then in honor of Vermont, we're going to have a snowfall chat. So look at it, see what aligns to your thinking. Is there stuff that aligns to your thinking? Is there something that confuses you? Is there something that's missing? I want you to type it into the chat box, but do not click send until I tell you, because then we'll see them all all into the chat box. So I'll be quiet for a moment or two and let you read it over, get some thoughts into the chat box. It's really hard for me to be quiet.
Pat, someone in the chat is asking you to repeat the prompt, please.
Oh, to include in the chat box something that aligns with your thinking, or is there something that confuses you, or something that we didn't think about? So there are a couple of options. Thank you, Sigrid. All right, 1, 2, 3, press send. Ryan, could you read some of those off? Oops, you're on mute. How many times have we heard that in meetings?
Oh, yeah, I see authentic popping up a lot. Authentic, relevant, and meaningful learning. Yeah, student evidence. Right, that it can be student or teacher developed. It's important.
And that's some work that we really want to pursue a little bit more deeply, our student designed assessments. And I know there are a lot of people around the country who are doing that work also. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and she's going to talk a little bit about the Assessment for Learning project and a tool that we found provoked really important and engaging conversations among educators.
Hi, I'm Emily Loita. I'm the English Language Arts Specialist at the Agency of Education and a former English teacher. The Assessment for Learning project is a collaborative effort inviting educators and systems leaders to fundamentally rethink the role of assessment in education. This is led by the Center for Innovation in Education, Next Generation Learning Challenges, and Two Revolutions. They created a self-reflection tool for leaders to use to reflect on their assessment systems. Many traditional assessment practices have the effect of ranking and sorting students, whether this is the intended use or not. These traditional assessments are primarily retrospective, meaning that they provide limited help for students and teachers to move learning forward. They are assessments of learning. So of course there's a place for assessments of learning, but balanced and equitable systems should rely more heavily on assessment for learning, which is an interrelated set of practices, processes, and enabling conditions with the power to deepen and personalize students' development of knowledge and skills, foster greater student ownership and agency in learning, and create more equitable classrooms, schools, and systems. There are 4 shifts in practice that educators should consider when they're reflecting on their assessments and their assessment systems. The first one is process. Assessment is often understood as an event, a test, a quiz, a state exam. In the case of end-of-year accountability exams that often drive assessment policy in schools, this event is disconnected from the content covered in the curriculum. We view assessment as a continuous process that is deeply integrated with curriculum and instruction. Assessment for Learning makes success criteria for student work clear at the outset, requires students to apply the knowledge and skills they are learning to solve complex problems, and involves cycles of feedback and revision. Students have a variety of opportunities and modalities to show what they know, and these opportunities are built right into curriculum and instruction. So we're going to take a few minutes to begin thinking about our assessment systems. This is only an introduction to this activity, which would take more time than we're able to spend today. And we're hoping that you will bring this activity back to your own schools and districts. So we'd like you to start by thinking about all the different types of assessments in your systems. And if we were in person, we would ask you to write each assessment on a separate sticky note, and you'd be placing them along a continuum. Today, we're going to be using Jamboard to create and post our sticky notes. So Pat is going to go into Jamboard. And I want to point out that there are 4 separate frames on the Jamboard, one for each of 4 different regions, geographic regions. So you can post your sticky notes on the one that best aligns with your geographic region. We thought it might be a little bit better to organize that way so that it can get too crowded. So you're going to create 1 sticky note for each assessment. Pat's going to model for you how to do that.
I clicked over here on the sticky note. I'm going to type in capstone project. I'm going to press save. You can make multiple, or you can just click out.
And we have found that it is better to click out right away. I think Ryan was about to say that, because they do stack right on top of each other. So yeah, you've got the right idea. You'll put the sticky note at the side of the spectrum where you feel, or anywhere along it where you feel that falls. So to the far left, assessment's an isolated event, not directly connected to curriculum. The far right, it's an ongoing process integrated with curriculum and instruction. So we'll take a few minutes, just get as many down as you can and move them around.
Oh, I see someone saw how to change the color as well. So that's good.
You can do more than one. Let's see if we can fill them up. What was interesting was, as teachers put the stickies on either end of the spectrum, sometimes we'd see the same assessment at opposite ends. That provoked a really important conversation about what data was produced, how are the data being used. The other thing we heard teachers saying was, oh my goodness, we do all these assessments, but how much of the data do we actually use? So those are important conversations for educators to have. We were curious if the assessments, how they would look in the different sections of the country. Oh, this is the Eastern, okay. And we also didn't say that one side of the arrow was bad and the other was good. I think it's really important to think about why you're assessing, what the purpose of assessment is, and be intentional about that. So if you haven't used Jamboard, also, we thought this would be a nice opportunity for you to get to know it. And there are other tools in Jamboard that you can certainly use. Drawing is fun. The laser pointer is also interesting.
As Pat said, this is really an interesting activity when you've got 2 educators in the same system that see the same type of assessment used for different purposes. It provokes some really meaningful conversation.
And then standing back and talking about, what do we think this should look like? What would we like it to look like in the future? All right, do you think we should head back?
Sure.
People can revisit this. You'll have the link in the PowerPoint.
There's also a link in the PowerPoint to the Assessment for Learning project, so you can look at more of their work. They've done some updates since we pulled this activity, so there's some really great stuff on their webpage. So there are a couple more shifts that we're not going to have time to do, but we would do the same activity with each of these arrows. So there's 3 more categories for the self-evaluation tool. You can bring the activity back to your school system and do a more thorough analysis. The second shift is priorities. Assessment for Learning prioritizes feedback and reflection instead of simply reporting what students know and don't know. The third shift is product. Assessment for Learning produces bodies of evidence of learning as opposed to a numerical score, which does not provide educators with information about what students do and do not understand. The fourth shift is purpose. Assessment for Learning enacts more equitable systems because it doesn't just assess students, it also assesses the learning environment and gives teachers information about how they can create more inclusive, culturally responsive classrooms in schools. So we'd like to give you a minute to look over the reflection questions. Choose which question or questions you'd like to answer and jot down your ideas in the chat. So we recognize that you won't have enough time or enough information to respond to all the questions right now, but we wanted to give them to you as questions you could bring back to your schools or districts to use in the future. So just take a minute or two, look at the questions, choose 1 or 2 to respond to in the chat.
I wonder if people had got any ideas as they were looking at the assessments that other people were doing, if there were some that they wanted to learn more about also.
That's a good question, Pat.
Yep.
More formative assessments, a variety of metrics in reporting to the state, authentic products, exhibitions of learning, students reflecting. These are all great. Teachers reflecting. Yeah, reflection is key for sure.
And I liked goal setting. They'll see that reflected in the personalized learning plans too.
Formative assessment too, yeah.
Especially in the distance learning, that's current times adds a whole new dimension to assessment.
Okay, Sigrid, I think
Ready?
you're up.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Sigrid Olson. I'm currently the curriculum and instruction coordinator for the agency, but until very recently, I was our personalized learning specialist. And so my focus, both in the series of convenings that we held here in person in Vermont, and today here in this little chat that we're having, is to bring in the personalized learning lens. At the beginning, Ryan was telling everybody about the different structures and legislation and board rules and things that in Vermont that really give us a lot of the backbone for what you can describe as a proficiency-based system here in Vermont, but it's also a personalized system because we do have Act 77, which specifies that all students in grades 7 through 12 in Vermont should engage in the personalized learning planning process. I'm really proud of what we have identified here in Vermont as our 5 elements of personalized learning. I've done a lot of work and research into what other states think about personalized learning. And of course, there's some overlap, but I do think that here in Vermont, these 5 elements show what we value that might be a little bit different than some other states. We value personal relationships as part of personalized learning. I think we all know that students learn best when they have a personal relationship with their teachers or another adult in the room. As we referred to before, I think Pat said it, we think that one of our elements, a strong element of personalized learning here in Vermont, is student agency and giving students that ownership over their learning and having some choice in their learning. You'll see flexible pathways there. I'm not sure if how many of you use that same term in your state, but basically flexible pathways means that there are a number of ways that students can both earn proficiency for their learning, and there are also a number of pathways that students can choose as they go through school and towards graduation. We've talked a lot about proficiency-based progression already so far today. And then the last thing that's one of our important elements of personalized learning here in Vermont are learner profiles. In Vermont, we call them personalized learning plans or PLPs. And I have worked on helping people think about what PLPs should look like and how to develop those in Vermont. So if we think about those 5 elements of personalized learning, but also remember at the very beginning of this, when we asked you this question, what is the most interesting way that you've ever shown you know something? We wanted you to drop it into the Menti. I'm not sure if people had time to do it. So think about quickly, what's an interesting way that you showed you knew something?
Should we give people who came late an opportunity to go in there now?
I think we have a couple people that came late. So you can think of it in your mind. If you have time, you can drop it in the Menti. What I really want people to do is think about that experience that you had in showing you knew something in an interesting way, in maybe a way that wasn't, a traditional assessment or a traditional test. I also want you to think about those 5 elements of personalized learning that I just briefly talked to you about. And I think Ryan's going to also drop those in the chat. I'm wondering if that personal experience you had about showing how you know something aligns with any of those 5 elements of personalized learning that we really strongly believe in here in Vermont. Maybe it aligns with 1, 2, all of them, who knows? So let's take a minute. I want you to think about those 2 different things. The interesting way you showed you'd learn something, and then take that and look at those 5 elements of personalized learning. Does it align with any of those? And drop your thoughts or answer into the chat, please.
Want me to go to the Menti so they can see it?
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Here's a time where you can also sort of check out what our colleagues who are with us on this session put down as well.
Looks like a lot of performance assessments.
I'm gonna have to go back and really check these out.
I once had 24 hours alone in the wilderness, building a shelter.
Oh.
Nice summative assessment at 13. It's a lot of variety.
Mhm.
Not many multiple choice tests, though.
Looks like a lot of individual interests.
A lot of applying knowledge too, applying and adapting, using it in unique contexts.
Yep.
Teaching someone else, don't we always learn something better
Yeah.
once we have to teach it to ourselves? Is that why we became teachers? And for
So,
those of you
yeah.
who don't know, we've all been classroom teachers.
Yep. So it looks like some people are saying that the way that they showed that they learned something involved some form of student agency, involved personal relationships in student agency. We have defensive learning that involved all of the elements. Okay.
I'll go back to the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Were there some responses in the chat that you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, I was just commenting on, yep, just doing that. So what we're trying to show here, and we'll tease it out a little bit more for you as we go along, is this relationship between personalized learning and the personalized learning planning process and formative assessment and an assessment that can really be powerful for students.
And so as I'm sure you noticed, many of the assessments that you described in the MNT are performance assessments. Performance assessments provide excellent opportunities to increase student agency and motivation by allowing them to help design their learning experiences. So it's help design. It's not necessary to give full control over to students. There's a continuum of collaboration. Educators can decide how much choice they want to give to their students, as well as which aspects of their learning they'd like to give control over. When you work with students to design learning experiences and assessments, sometimes it makes sense to allow them to have more control over certain aspects of the process while you retain control over others. Picture it like an equalizer with sliders that move independently of one another. You may, for example, want all of your students working toward achieving the same proficiency or standard, but you give them choice over how they are going to learn the skills and content, as well as how they're going to demonstrate that learning.
So again, my background a lot has really been looking into personalized learning, student-centered learning, inquiry-based learning. 30 years ago, I was a trained Foxfire teacher and taught that way in my classroom, and maybe some of the more mature folks on this here might know what that is, but it's basically a lot of student choice and a lot of student agency and frankly, designing curriculum and designing assessments. And so when we started to do this work and we started to thinking about how Vermont is a personalized system, and we really wanted to bring in that element of student designed assessment. And so we did create a template that people could use when having their students design their own assessments, or like Emily was saying, have some sort of input into the design of their assessments. So as the personalized learning specialist at the agency, I've always considered the PLPs and our personalized learning planning process is very similar to a student designed assessment process, but it might be sort of on a different scale. And so I was really interested in sort of doing an alignment between what we call in Vermont our critical elements of a personalized learning plan, which you can see there in this graphic in the right column. And our critical elements are the things that at the agency we recommend should be included in a personalized learning plan. As Pat said, we're a local control state, so people have locally, they can design their personalized learning plans how they want to design them, but we recommend that really for a rich PLP will have all these critical elements. I really wanted to align our critical elements to the different parts of the student designed assessment template that we had put out. This is my first attempt at that alignment. You can see what it looks like. And really, to me, there's, we have a pretty clear alignment between the two of those. And looking at these in sort of bigger chunks, there's a couple of elements in both that really talk about who the student is. Who am I and what am I interested in? And what are my goals? And also, what are my school's goals? Meaning, what are the proficiencies that my school or my supervisory union, has said that I need to address this year? There's another chunk of these elements that can address the bigger idea of what's my plan for learning. Okay, these are my goals. These are my student goals. This is what I'm interested in. What's my plan for pursuing this interest? And then there are the third section of how these things work together is around this idea: what's my final product? What's my evidence of learning? How does it show that I've learned something? And we talked a little bit about that with all of you, about how you showed that you learned something. The other piece of this is, how does that affect the future? In a bigger way, in a PLP, it might be this reflection piece. What does that mean for me as I move forward in my learning? It might be a reflection piece around a student-designed performance assessment. What does that mean? I'm a former social studies teacher, so it might mean, now that I've done this performance assessment or this inquiry-based assessment, what does this mean that I need to do to move forward as a citizen or to learn more? So that's how we are envisioning how we can think of student designed assessment in terms of personalized learning and personalized learning plans. What I want to show you, I had such a good time last year. I worked with some of our friends inside the agency, but also some of our friends who are educators outside of the agency, to create some sample personalized learning plans that include the portrait of a graduate, but also we can look at and see how you might look at these personalized learning plans as also being places where you would house a student designed performance assessment. So when you do get our slideshow that you have here, you'll be able to click on and sort of browse around in all three of these yourself. I'm just going to go through a little bit of one to sort of explain our thinking around this. So here's one that is really focused on history and a student that's interested in history. And I worked with the Vermont Historical Society on putting this one together. You can see in the tabs along the top some of the things that we included. We have a home page. We have a page that talks about the portrait of a graduate so that people can understand what that is. We have sort of an about me page. Remember, we talked about it's important in a PLP but also in a student designed assessment to understand who you are and what your goals are. So you'll sort of see that in the About Me pages of some of these if you take the time and click through. And then there's different tabs along the top that are really, each tab is honing in on one of the students' goals and fleshing that out. In this one, I also included some additional tabs. You can see here, this is a high schooler who's interested in history. So she did some work in her PLP around what are some careers for history majors. You'll find that under that tab. She also has tabs that have her job shadow forms in there and independent study forms and things like that. But what we want to do right now is just, and I know we're going quick, but it's we only have an hour, but you will be able to look at these and on your own. I want to show you what this looks like and think about how it might look mirror what a student designed performance assessment would look at. If we scroll through this page, you'll see at the top the student's goal. You'll also see how this student connected her goal to the portrait of part of the portrait of the graduate around learner agency. She also included a section here, expectations. So these expectations are actually her independent study, learning expectations, and also some standards from the C3, which is the National Social Studies Standards. You know, I want to, if you can scroll up, I forgot to say her goal here. This is actually based on a real student, which is really cool. And this real student really did this. She used her independent study and her participation in History Day to earn her 11th grade history credit. So this is actually a real thing based on a real student. Sorry, so we'll scroll down. So she's got her expectations and then her action steps. These are the action steps that she is going to take to achieve those goals. Showing her evidence of learning, which also is achievement of action steps. This is actually a website that she created. I think we have a link to the website here, and this is, we did a sort of a download of the website in case it ever went away, but this student actually created a website about Jody Williams, who Vermonters might know, and some of you might know she's a Vermonter who won the Nobel Peace Prize around her work for eradicating landmines. And so here's actually, I wanted to do this. These were my goals. These are my action steps. Here's actually the thing I created, the website that I created. And then at the bottom is her reflection. And so she is reflecting back specifically around the goals that she had established at the beginning, around writing, around information literacy, and around content. So this was really fun to do. And again, it is based on a real student. Some of the work in here is actually that student's work, which we got permission to use. And hopefully you can take some time and go through these, and feel free to reach out and ask me any questions about that if you have them.
Thank you, Sigrid. So I just wanted to point out on the Vermont Agency of Education on our website some pages that you might be particularly interested in. We have tons of information about performance assessments and additional information about local assessment systems on the Vermont State and Local Assessments page. Proficiency-based, oops, didn't mean to do that. I try to make the proficiency-based learning more of a boutique than a mall. However, it's starting to turn into a mall, but there is a lot of good information, especially right now. I know people are interested in proficiency-based grading and transcripts, and there's a whole section about that. The personalized learning page has the manual that goes along with the personalized learning plan, so people might find that very interesting. I know we said we would give Elliot 3 minutes at the end. I think we're going to make it, Elliot. So once again, reminding you, go into the report. You can find out more about the work we did and additional tools. We just tried to highlight some of the ones we found particularly interesting. And once again, we thank you so much for being here this afternoon and spending an hour with us. We know that you have a lot going on right now.
Thank you, Pat. You gave me 4 minutes.
Perfect.
Well, all I can say is, wow, what a really terrific set of resources and tools and ideas and strategies for advancing proficiency-based assessment and really well beyond assessment to how we can all really be thinking more deeply and more precisely about all the nuances of this work that we're trying to do. For those who were attending the webinar, if you found that you wanted to know more about different aspects of this, I would definitely get a copy of Pat's report that she was just showing the slide of, which is one of the top resources under the Aurora Institute resources section right now. It goes into a lot of details and explanations about some of the points that they were discussing today. But their presentation also went well beyond that report. And so this webinar recording and slide deck will be available on our website within a day or two. I want to say thank you so much to our panelists, Pat, Ryan, Emily, and Sigrid from the Vermont Agency of Education. And we really appreciate the valuable insights and strategies you've shared. And we're really looking forward to hearing more over time, because you're clearly moving ahead so quickly and definitively on aspects of competency-based education that are useful to so many districts and schools and states beyond Vermont. We know that there may be some unanswered questions. If folks want to stay after we wrap up in a minute, the presenters have generously offered to stay for a while and answer your questions after we do a quick closing. So we really appreciate everyone who attended the webinar today and all of your participation in those great tools and Vermont's team. It was wonderful to have that live demonstration of all those helpful ways of doing virtual collaboration. It would be very helpful if everyone could click on the link to our feedback survey, which is in the chat box. It's just 3 questions and should just take about a minute to complete. So we'd really appreciate if you could do that. And while you're completing the survey, I also want to announce that we'll be having another webinar on January 27th, focused on strengthening relationships and social emotional learning supports. So clearly tying into Vermont's definition of personalized learning as well. And that webinar will be led by school design experts from Spring Point. So we hope you'll join us, and the link for that is now also in the chat box if you want to register or get more information about that webinar on January 27th. And can I have the next slide, please?
Oh, sorry, that's me.
Thank you, Pat. So once again, please join me in thanking our presenters. We invite you to stay connected with us at the Aurora Institute, and we welcome you to stay if you have any questions. But for everyone else, thanks so much for joining us today, and take care, everybody.
Thank you.